And there's been a lot of misinformation and confusion around this amendment.
I have heard the term misinformation so much lately, it's crazy. Every time someone says something anywhere now, it's just misinformation. Everything's misinformation. So let's go to the heart of it. Let's stop the misinformation and let's go out there and get the facts.
I agree that there has been misinformation in this. I think a lot of it is coming from the Liberal government.
This is the Wild West we're in right now. So,
my Liberal colleagues would show some humility across the way when talking about misinformation. The whole reason that we're here today is because of an amendment that they put forward that does indeed have massive implications in this country.
The Liberals need to wear this mess, and that's the bottom line. They need to wear this mess. And how did we get here? Like, how in the world did we get to this point? This was a complete sham, to be honest with you.
We have a premier in this country saying if this passes, people are going to starve in the north. So we have 2 meetings. We barely scratched the surface of the people that are impacted by this ban. Again, the largest hunting rifle ban in Canadian history here. We barely scratched the surface. For people who don't know, 2 meetings, as you know, Mr. Chair, is about 12 witnesses. 12 witnesses. 12 witnesses. I don't think that that's nearly enough.
For every action, there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction.
We can solve this whole mess if the Liberals would just get rid of the clause.
Not a point of order.
Government Order 4.
Not a point of order. So
This reaction you're seeing, not only from members of the opposition, but from the public, is precisely because of how this landed. And I'm sorry to my Liberal colleagues, but the blame for that lies squarely on your shoulders. The way it was rolled out is going to be a textbook example for future generations on what not to do.
So welcome to meeting number 54 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The meeting is public. Pursuant to Standing Order 1064, the committee is commencing consideration of the request by 7 members of the committee to discuss their request regarding the need to hear witnesses on the proposal contained in Amendment G4 to Bill C-21. I would also like to take a moment to recognize our former chair, the Honourable late Jim Carr, and I wonder if we could all have a minute of silence. Madame Michaud, please, Madame Michaud, please move your motion, and then I believe Mr. Noormohamed would like to respond to it, and then Ms. Dancho.
Thank you very much, Chair. And also thank you for this moment of silence. I'd like to take a moment to express my condolences following the loss of our friend and colleague, Mr. Carr. I had the chance to speak with him and work with him at the committee over the past few months. He will be missed. I will certainly miss him. I really did get to like Mr. Carr over the months that I was working with him, so my thoughts are with his family and his colleagues. I'd like to thank my Liberal and NDP colleagues for having signed my letter. Chair, I believe we are all on the same page. We know that G4 is a very weighty amendment. A number of people have not had the chance to weigh in on the impact of the amendment on C-21. And as such, I'm just going to go through my notes Mr. Chair. So, at this point, I think it would be good for our clause-by-clause study to hear if we heard from new witnesses. I know the Conservatives find this proposal a little bit shady, but it's really the very thing that I asked for. I asked for 2 meetings with experts, and the Conservatives said no. That's why I didn't approach them when I was sending my letter. I did notice a certain open-mindedness from the part of my Liberal NDP colleagues, which is why I went to speak to them. And indeed, they accepted my idea in the end. I appreciate having had public servants before the committee to answer our questions. But public servants are somewhat limited in what they could say, and they noted this on a number of occasions. What is more, if I were to propose an amendment to a bill, colleagues would be able to ask me, why am I moving the amendment? Why is it worded in such a way? And then I would be able to respond to their questions, even if public servants weren't there to respond on my behalf. So for this reason, it's necessary to have independent experts come before the committee. They might be able to shed a light on some of the questions that have been brought up. We believe that G4 will have a major impact on C21, an impact that wasn't present when we last heard from witnesses. So I would ask colleagues to debate reasonably. I am asking for 2 meetings. This will let us hear up to about 12 different groups if we have 3 witnesses an hour and 4 hours of meetings. That, to me, seems quite reasonable. All the parties present would be able to ask questions, hear comments. So that's what I'm proposing, and for that reason, I have moved the following motion, which has been sent to the interpreters so that they could render it into English. I also sent it to the clerk, that the committee temporarily suspend clause-by-clause study of Bill C-21 and allocate 2 consecutive meetings to studying the effects of Amendment G4, starting with the next meeting of this committee. That in doing so, the committee invites witnesses and experts that it deems necessary to weigh in on the new questions raised by G4, and that the committee use its normal procedures to select witnesses to appear. That after the witnesses have given testimony, that the committee resume clause by clause where it left off and continue per the normal rules set out in Standing Order 75. So I'd like to hear my colleagues weigh in on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to also start by expressing on behalf of all of us our condolences to Jim's family. And I wanted to share something with this committee before I get into the substance, because I had the chance to speak to Jim on Thursday after his bill was sent to third reading, and he said something that I wanted to share with us because it was actually about us. And Jim said that among his parliamentary experiences, working with this committee was one of his greatest joys. And he went on to say that it was because we had managed to figure out how to do complicated things together. So in the spirit of that, in channeling sort of what Jim had said, he said to me, I know it's tough, but you guys are going to get this done together. So I just wanted to share that with everybody because, yeah, anyways, because I think that's been a guiding principle for a lot of us in this committee, and we've had our differences in how we've kind of come up with things and come through things, but I think it's an important message kind of for us to reflect on as we go into the holidays. I wanted to thank my colleagues from the Bloc and the NDP for signing the 1064 and for all of us coming together to do that, which is, I think, an important step, and I think it channels a bit of what Jim would have wanted us to do. You know, we've said from the beginning that Canadians deserve to feel safe in their communities. We've also said that we want to make sure that hunters and farmers and Indigenous communities are not affected in that process. You know, there's been a lot of conversations in the last few weeks about how to best protect Canadians from gun violence. It's emotional, it's complicated. And a lot of people are counting on us to act in the right way to help prevent gun violence and to make sure that we are taking dangerous weapons off the streets. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about the amendments to C-21, rightly. And I think in this, of course, which would create the standard legal definition for what constitutes an assault-style firearm. And the definition of assault-style firearm is a complex technical endeavor, and it's not really something that lends itself, I think, to the broad generalizations, which is sort of how we seem to want to do politics these days. Gun community, gun control advocates, Canadians of all political stripes have asked for a clear definition so that everyone knows which side of the line they are on. And there's been a lot of misinformation and confusion around this amendment that was presented to the committee. There have been a lot of people that have taken advantage of kind of what is not known by others to fan outrage. But there's also a lot of misinformation from people that just don't know. I myself had a couple of people reach out to me saying, listen, I have this particular gun. I'm concerned that it is now banned. I went back and checked for them and was able to reassure them that it was not. We don't all have that luxury. I think we need to find a way to make sure that we are able to reassure people of whether or not their guns are going to be on this list. And I think the most important part of this is making sure we're hearing from voices that feel that they haven't been heard so that we can hear different points of view to help make this better legislation, so that we can help dispel some of the myths, and so that, frankly, we can do our job and, if we can, improving this legislation, make it even better. And in particular, when it comes to working through potentially those guns that are on this list that perhaps should not have been, have those conversations together. And I think before us is a motion that allows us to do exactly that. And if passed, I think it gives us the opportunity to hear from new witnesses, which I think is critical. It allows us to consult broadly, take down the temperature, I think we all want to do. Allows us to listen to different perspectives and actually have a healthy discussion based on facts. Now, that said, we've heard from a lot of witnesses already. We've had hours of testimony from government officials. They have sought to dispel misinformation or concerns about certain guns with technical expertise. We may not have liked their style, but they did a really good job, I think, in going through lists of guns that were on the list that people thought were on the list, but that actually weren't. To clarify that for Canadians, to give people the comfort that their guns were not caught on this list. So what I would suggest humbly is that we use this motion to really narrow our discussions down, iron out the specifics of the amendment. Let's call on people that are informed on how G4 will impact the public. Let's try not to get lost in partisanship. Let's actually make sure Canadians have the facts that they need. But let's not do it in a way that does not allow voices to be heard that haven't been heard. I think that's really important. I know all of my colleagues and I are committed to working collaboratively to make sure that no guns that are commonly used for hunting are captured within the proposed amendment. We always have said that the goal of this is to target assault-style weapons, not hunting rifles. And I know it's going to take work. I know we have to find ways to bridge the gaps together, but we are committed to doing that work together. We are committed to making sure that we pass a good bill to protect Canadians, to get guns off the streets that need to be taken off the streets, that hunters, farmers, Indigenous communities do not find themselves unreasonably impacted by this. And I think we can do it. We have a track record in this committee of getting stuff done. And I really do think that if we can pass this motion today and get on with the work of ensuring that we get this bill right, Canadians will look to us and accept and admire, I think, will respect the fact that we had healthy debate, we had disagreement, but we got something over the finish line that protected Canadians from gun crime, but that also protected hunters, farmers, and Indigenous communities and their ability to go and hunt. Thank you.
We go next to Ms. Dancho, followed by Mr. Lloyd, and then Mr. MacGregor. Ms. Dancho, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to be able to offer remarks on my bloc colleagues' motion today. Conservatives were not able to put any words on the record, unfortunately, last week, although certainly Mr. Noormohamed, I was quite impressed. He could talk for 2 solid hours last Thursday. That was, by all parliamentary accounts, quite impressive. So well done, but certainly it limited our ability to weigh in on this and to ask experts further questions. I was actually quite hoping to ask them a number of things, but hopefully we'll have the opportunity again. Certainly I appreciate Ms. Michaud trying to find a pathway forward here. And just to address some of the things she said, again, I appreciate her efforts here. Of course, in the last committee meeting when she did put forward her first effort to do that, my main issue with that was that we would have had to have gone in camera, which means in secret, beyond the public's ability to to view what we would have done, Mr. Chair. So that means ultimately we would have come out of a secret meeting with a plan forward of something that impacts 2.3 million gun owners. And I just don't think that that's the best approach. So I'm very glad we have an opportunity today to speak about this in public. I would have appreciated the opportunity to review the letter. There's a possibility we may have signed on to it as a Conservative team as well. We're certainly not opposed to more witnesses. In fact, what we would like to see is considerable consultation being put on this historic long gun ban that impacts hundreds, if not thousands of models of commonly used hunting rifles. And so I think something that's really important for the committee to remember, the only consultation that the Liberal government can currently point to in this regard is from 2018 when they went to Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and Fredericton, which are all phenomenal cities with phenomenal Canadians in them. However, I think you'd agree, Mr. Chair, there isn't a lot of farmers there. The density of hunters is likely not as high as, say, rural Quebec or rural Manitoba or Nunavut or the Northwest Territories. So I do feel that that main consultation they did on gun control falls very, very short of the rural and northern constituencies that should be represented at the table. And certainly it's been widely established both by the National Post, the CBC, CTV, that of course there are numerous commonly used long guns on this ban list that are used for hunting and as protection tools for livestock by farmers and the like. We could also talk about the conservation aspect of this. That's been widely recognized and established. There's countless examples of that. And in fact, the National Post today had an article called about a lot of misinformation from the government. They really break down the misinformation that I agree that with Mr. Noormohamed that there has been misinformation in this. And I do believe, though, a bit contrary to, I think, his point was that I think a lot of it is coming from the Liberal government, who for weeks said that, no, this isn't a hunting rifle ban. This does not impact commonly used hunting rifles, which, of course, now we know, and of course it does. The SKS is a perfect example of this. It's one of the most popular hunting rifles in Canada. It was used in the 1940s. And so we know that, of course, it's about 70, 80 years ago it was used as a military tool, and now it is commonly accepted as a hunting rifle. So I guess what they're trying to say is anything that's ever been used, perhaps even going back to muskets in the Civil War, should be banned in Canada. But I think a lot of hunters, as has been established, there are so many long guns that are so common. We're talking classic woodstock hunting rifles that are being used that will be banned by this. And I think that that's really the problem we're coming down to. And I don't necessarily see a path forward. The Prime Minister came out last week and said he will absolutely, and I'm paraphrasing, this is not his exact verbatim quote, but he will not be adjusting at all the definition of in the semi-automatic context. And that is one of the biggest problems. And something that the committee may have missed, to Mr. Noormohamed's credit, he asked this question. The analysts or the civil servants that were here made this very clear to his, good question, that the list that's about 300 pages long is firearms that fall under the OIC from May 2020, the ban criteria there. So 10,000 joules and a 20 millimeter bore diameter. That's what's in that 400 or 300 odd pages with several hundred firearms in there. That's what's in there. 480 of them are brand new. That's what's causing all the uproar. But what people don't understand, and what was confirmed in the last committee meeting, is that that list is actually going to be thousands of models of firearms long, because the semi-automatic definition that she confirmed, the bureaucrat from the last meeting confirmed that there is not a list that outlines how many firearms that is. That is not encompassed in the hundreds of pages that hunters have actually been able to see. So again, what Canadians that are impacted by this don't even realize is that the firearms that are being banned, there's actually thousands of more models that will be banned. There's so many semi-automatic hunting rifles with magazine capabilities that don't meet the 10,000 joules and don't have the 20 millimeter bore diameter. So those are countless more hunting rifles that we don't even have a list for that yet. I thought that was quite a shocking development. This list that's this big is likely going to be this big. And this is just really what we feel is the beginning. They're opening the door. And of course, a lot of the firearms on that list are lever action, brake action, bolt action. There's a number of those caught up in this. Obviously, classic hunting rifles as well. And so we just feel that that the approach so far, there has been misinformation, but of course we feel that it's been the government leading on that. And even the gun control community has said that they're very disappointed with the government's communication on this. So what I would say when we're talking about the witness testimony in particular, while I appreciate the effort, I do feel that 2 meetings, we might as well not even have meetings, because 2 meetings does not even cover the Indigenous communities that deserve to be at the table. Remember, we have Métis, First Nations, and Inuit, and we have various regional differences for various Indigenous culture, very different issues from region to region. So if we're going to even adequately represent the Indigenous communities, we would need more than 2 meetings, just those alone, let alone hunting and wildlife and angling associations, conservation associations, gun shops who have been absolutely hammered. This would be the 3rd gun ban they have to deal with in 2.5 years. And these are mom and pop shops for the most part. If you take Cabela's out of the mix, all of these are run by families, especially in rural and remote communities. So they have been absolutely hammered. We need them represented as well. Of course, gun ranges that are widely used by police in the areas as well, those are privately owned. Those are being hammered by this. We also have heirloom collectors and World War II enthusiasts who collect memorabilia from the various world wars. We should have them at the table. We've also seen CBC coverage talking about the heirloom aspect of impacting Remembrance Day, because a number of the cannons and sort of, again, those antique kind of World War I and rifles will be, some of them will be banned under this. So, but of course, there's a lot of Remembrance Day ceremonies and other reenactments that happen in this country that are very important for remembrance purposes and honoring what Canadians, how much they sacrificed, what they experienced, to give Canadians a bit of an education of what that was like. And so they're being targeted by this as well. And so they should be at the table. So perhaps we should have various legions at the table, for example, or at least one. We also have the Northwest Territories, the Premier of the Northwest Territories, coming out and saying, if this passes, people will starve in her community, because they use legitimate tools that are being banned to feed their families. We have a Premier in this country saying, if this passes, people are going to starve in the North. She should absolutely be here. So should other First Nations communities or Inuit communities in the North as well. We have Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, the governments there that are expressing great dismay about this. Perhaps we should have folks from their various levels of government come out. I think I mentioned conservation as well. What is the impact on those with hunting licenses and other licensing fees? What is the decrease that's going to be in that regard? We know a lot of the conservation efforts in Canada are a result of those fees. So what impact is that going to have? We also know that rural and northern communities really depend in many parts, especially Indigenous communities. Often there'll be guides for hunters, and often they're American hunters. So we have a hunting tourism in this country, particularly from the Americans, who will often bring semi-automatic rifles that will be banned now. So maybe the Americans who pay tens of thousands of dollars to come here, enriching local northern and rural communities, Indigenous guides, what's going to happen to that source of income? Are there Americans who are going to say, this is just, the 3rd ban, we're just not going to bother? So what's that going to mean for areas like Timmins, Ontario, and other communities, and northern Manitoba, where there's fly-in prime hunting lodges and outfitters that really provide a sense of ability to have resources and economies in areas where there isn't booming in other industries. So I've just outlined a few, Mr. Chair, and they're certainly not exhaustive, but the idea that we can fit in even just half of what I just mentioned in 2 meetings, it's just impossible. And what's really frustrating for us as Conservatives is this work should have been done by the Liberal government and their vast resources. But now the committee, as you know, Mr. Chair, this is now our 4th week talking about this. We're going to have to go back, sort of flip-flop through this backwards in this committee process because they didn't do their homework. And now they're sort of turning it around and saying, well, okay, we'll do it in 2 meetings. So we have 2 meetings. We barely scratched the surface of the people that are impacted by this ban. Again, the largest hunting rifle ban in Canadian history here. We barely scratched the surface. For people who don't know, 2 meetings, as you know, Mr. Chair, is about 12 witnesses. 12 witnesses. 12 witnesses. I don't think that that's nearly enough. So we just feel that any suggestion that 2 meetings is adequate I'm going to say it, I do feel that it's offensive to the people that are going to be impacted by this. It does not give them the dignity of having a seat at the table. And like I said, it does not even represent the Indigenous communities that need to be at the table, let alone everybody else. So we could not and we will not support 2 meetings under any circumstance. Now, recognizing that as many meetings as Conservatives would want would not be supported likely by all parties, I would say 50 would be adequate, given that that's the consultation that should have been done across the country, that they should have gone to Nunavut, they should have gone to the Northwest Territories, Northern BC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Would love to see them go to Churchill. So I'm going to propose a bit of a solution to this, and perhaps it'll open up a bit of the discussion. And again, one of the last points I'll make before I do that is something I mentioned, I believe it was our first committee meeting when the Liberals pulled this amendment. It was about the utility of semi-automatics, and we've actually seen a number of people come forward who are saying the same thing that I am. So it's not just me, Mr. Chair. Actually, the NDP, I'll give her so much credit for, the NDP for Nunavut in question period talked about the polar bear threat in Nunavut, and how the ban will impact people's safety against polar bears in Nunavut. And that was something that I raised first off in this discussion that has not been widely recognized. Actually, just recently somebody sent me, remember I talked about those wild boars, which I don't know if other committee members were aware of other parties, but I was just sent a video of a massive, there was about 30 odd wild boars that attacked a group of hunters. And again, very fast. They have tusks. They can be very deadly, and they do an all-out assault, and these hunters are running for their literal lives away from these wild boars. So again, I just feel that we need to have expert testimony to explain the raw utility of having a semi-automatic hunting rifle, because there is one, Mr. Chair. I know this. I know hunters know this. I know farmers know this, and certainly Northern Canadians are aware of this. So I don't mean to go on and on, but I just have so much to say, and we weren't allowed to talk in the last week. So, but I will wrap it up. I will move a sub-amendment here, Mr. Chair. And actually, before I do, I did want to mention, I should have done this off the top, my apologies, but I've been thinking a lot about Jim Carr, and we had a really great, really, it was almost a year we got with him as the chair, and it was when I first came on as vice chair here, he was the chair, and it was his first time chairing, and he did a really phenomenal job. And I do have to say, it was actually nice to come to work and be on this committee. We worked together, I think, for probably the first time on public safety. We were able to all sign on to a guns and gangs study, pretty unheard of for all parties to agree to policy on guns and gangs. We also did an IMVE study, and we all came together on those. There was no dissenting reports. I think that's pretty impressive, and I lend a lot of that to Jim. Mr. Chair, I know that you'll do a phenomenal job as well. I have full confidence in you, but I am going to miss him a lot, and it's been a quite emotional 24 hours for all of us. So in that spirit, much like Mr. Noormohamed, I am trying to put forward a good faith amendment to this motion so we can open the discussion to something more reasonable. And just to underline, there is no way that we will agree to 2 meetings. It just will not do justice to this. So I'm going to put a proposal out there. People are welcome to counter-propose, but this is the proposal we're putting forward for discussion. And within this amendment, Mr. Chair, a lot of it, when we were writing this, we thought about the rural and northern Canadians that need to be represented at the table, and also how this committee has never traveled in the year that I've been chair of it. So why not take this opportunity and do the homework the Liberal government should have done? And so I hope that we can come together on this and meet in the middle. So I would move, and again, I don't have the amendment in front of me, Mr. Chair, so I don't know where exactly this would be placed, but likely where it starts at 2 meetings, and it would say...
The amendment has been distributed, I believe, by email.
Okay, thank you very much. So right after, I'm looking at it now. So right after 2 meetings here, where does it say that? Rural North, yeah. So we would say that the committee temporarily suspend the clause-by-clause study of Bill C-21 and that it allocate 20 consecutive meetings to study the effects of the amendments G4 and G46, and that these meetings include committee travel across Canada as soon as possible to rural and northern and Indigenous communities to hear from impacted individuals. That the committee, and then there's another small amendment in this amendment, so I'll just keep reading, that the committee invite to testify the witnesses and experts that it deem necessary to hear in order to answer the questions raised by new concepts and amendment by G4, and that the committee proceed accordingly to the usual routine rules for the invitations of the selected witnesses, that committee completion of the testimony, the Minister of Public Safety appear for 4 hours before the committee resumes in clause-by-clause consideration where it has been suspended, and proceed according to the usual rules pursuant to Standing Order 75 of the House of Commons. So just in sum, we're saying let's do 20 meetings, and let's ensure some of those meetings, if not all of them, involve rural and northern travel, including Indigenous communities, and at the end of all that testimony, we bring back the Minister of Public Safety for 4 hours to answer our questions. So that is my amendment. Thought that we can discuss it now as a committee and see if we can come together on this, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
That's a massive amendment. Do you have that in writing in both languages at this point?
So it's not actually that big, but
Seemed like a lot longer than 2
I reread the whole motion.
Okay, so you're changing, you're amending the number of meetings to 10?
20.
20, sorry. And you're adding the
Committee travel
committee travel, and you're adding...
to rural and remote, or rural and northern, including Indigenous.
Okay, and
And the minister at
and
the
the
end.
minister at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so the discussion continues on the amendment.
So I believe we're now discussing the sub-amendment proposed by...
Amendment. It could
Ms.
be, it
Dancho?
could be sub-amended,
It
but
was an amendment.
it's an amendment
It's to a motion.
to the motion that Madame Michaud
Oh, I
has
see.
given. It's complicated.
Yes, thank you.
I have a
You know,
map here,
I
so-
I haven't been at the committee for a few meetings, but I've been watching very closely the evidence that's been put forward, and I want to thank my colleague, Ms. Michaud, Madame Michaud, for bringing forward this amendment and showing a desire to have additional witnesses to look into this, you know, what I think is just a massive amendment. You know, and I wish, you know, my Liberal colleagues would show some humility across the way when talking about misinformation, and perhaps recognize that the whole reason that we're here today is because of an amendment that they put forward that does indeed have massive implications in this country. But moving forward, I think that this amendment put forward by my colleague, Ms. Dancho, is well placed, because I remember back to earlier on during C21 testimony, we had Indigenous witnesses come to this committee, and they were very clear that they had not been consulted, and they did not feel consulted about this legislation. And it kind of disappointed me that we moved into clause by clause without taking a step back to recognize that, you know, these are Indigenous people in this country who have been disenfranchised by this country for centuries, for over a century. And they're telling us at committee that they were not consulted. Like these are representatives of First Nations and Indigenous communities. And this committee basically, you know, took down their testimony and said, well, we're going to move along. And that didn't sit right with me at the time. And, you know, I didn't know if I was going to have an opportunity to raise this issue, but I think now is a good opportunity to raise this issue, because when we spoke to those witnesses, they said it's not good enough just to talk to the chiefs, because it was noted that, you know, one of the Liberal members said, well, we spoke to a chief about this and they said that they thought it was all right. You know, that's a big mistake, because we really need to get into the grassroots with Indigenous communities, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And we also need to approach them on their level. And I'm not saying limited to those groups, because I think there's lots of other groups that we need to hear from on this specific amendment. But just speaking about the Indigenous witnesses for a moment, it's quite a thing to ask that people come to Ottawa from these rural and remote communities and northern communities. You know, a lot of times I know there is, you know, financial compensation for people to come here, but it's just not feasible for them. And we also know that in this country we still don't have a very strong network of rural broadband, which also eliminates. And this leads to the question of capacity. Where there is no capacity, I don't believe there can be consent. And so I think it would really be essential for this committee, as a sign of reconciliation and good faith, to actually set aside some meetings for this committee to actually go into these communities, you know, within reason. You know, we're talking about Whitehorse, Yellowknife, 𝐂𝐿𝐿, Churchill, northern Saskatchewan, northern Alberta, Vancouver Island, Labrador, you know, just to name a few places. You know, and maybe not all of those places, but certainly some of those places, they all have merit. It's important for us to go into these communities and invite these people within their own communities to come to our committee to have their say and to be heard by us. And I think that would be a tremendous show of reconciliation in this country. I think it'd be a tremendous show of willingness to consult with First Nations and people who live in rural Inuit and Métis and folks that live in rural areas who hunt and trap for sustenance or for recreation. And so I really want to lend further support to my colleague's amendment here and suggest that I think there's room for flexibility if members have specific places that they'd like to go to, or if there's a specific number of meetings that members think are appropriate. But I think, setting out 20 as an initial proposal is a strong proposal. And I would hope that these amendments are taken in a good spirit by this committee. Thank you.
And, before I get into my remarks, I also want to add my voice to colleagues about the late Honourable Jim Carr. It's funny how your relationship with a person changes over your parliamentary career. Jim and I are both from the class of 2015, and in the first parliament I served with him, the 42nd, I was often doing battle with him in his role as Minister of Natural Resources because of pipeline projects which negatively affect the coastal British Columbians I'm so proud to represent. But, I got to know a more personal side of Jim as chair of this committee, and I think you can summarize him as tough but fair, and also just a very kind-hearted person. I think the people of Winnipeg South Centre, I hope I've got his writing right, we're very fortunate to have him as a representative, and I know his prairie colleagues from all parties will miss him. If his family's watching this, all I can say is I offer my sincere condolences. The parliamentary family is going to miss him. So rest in peace, Jim. You were a great chair. And Mr. Chair, I know those were big shoes to fill, but you have our confidence. It's not an easy committee to manage. I think you'll be the first to admit that. So colleagues, we've now had 6 meetings at this committee at clause by clause, and we are still stuck on clause 1. We're still stuck on the very same amendment we were 6 meetings ago. It's hardly a tale of parliamentary efficiency or effective use of tax dollars, and I think the Canadian public rightly understand that. I haven't had a chance to put my voice on the record on this whole, so I'm going to ask colleagues to indulge me for a bit because I have a few things that I want to get on the record. First of all, what I would like to say is that in politics, as in life, trust is easily broken, but it's extremely hard to repair. The way this amendment landed has frankly been a complete and total abuse of process. And, the reason why we're hung up here is because we as committee members, with our limited resources, especially on the opposition side, are now being asked to do a tremendous amount of extra work on a bill that should have been done by the government side. To land this amendment on our lap at the 11th hour, after we've completed witness testimony, I had no chance whatsoever to tailor my committee strategy based on an amendment that is going to affect long guns. And I'll tell you what, the irony of all of this, because I know how important Bill C-21 was to this government, the irony is that if this amendment hadn't been dropped at the 11th hour, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. We'd be talking probably about how C-21 was sent off to the Senate, and we would be conducting important work on C-20. That's being held up by this mess, again, of the government's own creation. C-20 is an important piece of legislation that's going to create much-needed oversight, transparency, and accountability to the RCMP and the CBSA. That's something we've been talking now for 7 years. So, I know there's frustration on all sides, but this was brought about by the government. It should have been anticipated because it's like the Newtonian laws of politics. For every action, there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction. And I have to tell you that correspondence-wise, I've talked to colleagues from all parties, but some members of my caucus, they had not received one single piece of correspondence on C-21 until this amendment dropped. And now it's making up half their correspondence. The way it was rolled out is going to be a textbook example for future generations on what not to do. On what not to do for how you amend your own bill, communication strategy, the list is long. So I need to get on the record just how displeased I am, because I think it took for granted the important work we've been able to do at this committee. And just to underline, Mr. Chair, just how egregious this was, as soon as the amendment came to our attention, I had my legislative assistant contact the Library of Parliament, because we wanted to get a sense of how sub-amendment G, how that was going to impact firearms models. We also wanted to get a sense of how the scheduled list was going to compare with the May 2020 OIC. And our analysts, to their immense credit, produced a pretty amazing document, a very long Excel spreadsheet. But they warned us that it was going to be incomplete because they right away checked with the Justice Department, and they confirmed that there was no such analysis to share with the Library of Parliament. So here you have a government dropping this amendment on our lap, and their own department has not done an impact analysis. And we're expected to suddenly take this work up with our limited resources as the opposition. That is a simple no-go. And in fact, Mr. Chair, I want to reference this because I do know when C-21 was introduced on May the 30th, I think it was in an exchange with reporters, Minister Mendicino did make mention of an amendment they were thinking of bringing to the bill. Which begs the question, why did the bill have to be introduced on May 30th if already at that point they were thinking of an amendment? In the very first meeting that we had the minister for the first hour, and we had departmental officials in the second hour. And I've got it right here, Mr. Speaker. I asked the Assistant Deputy Minister, Taleeb Noormohamed, and I asked him, in the last minute questioning I had about the May 30th announcement, I asked about, what is this amendment? Can you inform the committee of which specific section of C-21 you're seeking to amend, what it's going to look like, so that we can have some heads-up notice on this? And his response, Mr. Chair, was, quote, "The only thing I could say is that you heard the same thing I did from the minister on TV. I can't comment any further on that one. I'm sorry about that." So an assistant deputy minister, square one, very first meeting, is unable to comment on what is eventually going to be a huge amendment to a bill. So after that, given that the assistant deputy minister, pretty high official in the department, is unable to provide details to me as a committee member, and I'm supposed to do my due diligence on a bill, is unable to provide that information, I dropped it. Because there were other things in the bill, tangential things that I could see, comment on, things that I had had the chance over the summer of this year to actually speak to my constituents about. I made the effort this summer to visit the Victoria Fish and Game Protective Association. I had some very frank conversations with people about the handgun freeze, what that would mean, and I took their comments back with me to try and make some fixes based on that feedback. These are law-abiding constituents who simply want to be able to practice their sport. At no time, Mr. Chair, did I talk to people about their hunting rifles or their hunting shotguns because, again, that wasn't in the bill. It was not defended by the Minister of Public Safety during second reading speech. I did not have the opportunity during questions and comments to ask the Minister about that. I did not have the chance during my own second reading speech to talk about these things because they were not in the bill. So a complete abuse of process. And, I have to say, I sit on 3 committees, and I've seen this happen in other committees, especially with consequential legislation. And I'm going to cite Bill C-7 from the last Parliament. That was, of course, the amendment to our medical assistance in dying regime, which added track 2 for people whose death was not reasonably foreseeable. In the debates on that, the first version of C7 included a continued prohibition for persons who had a mental illness as a sole underlying condition. And the government even introduced a charter statement with Bill C7 explaining why that prohibition should continue, because there was not enough knowledge. There were still some gaps in, whether treatments would be effective. But what happened in that process, Mr. Chair, was that the Senate amended Bill C7. They got rid of that prohibition, introduced a sunset clause, and then the government accepted it. They accepted it, so it became part of Bill C7. And then they established a committee afterwards, again, the cart before the horse, so that we as a committee could study something that's already part of the law. That's exactly what we are being asked to do at this committee. It is a proposed amendment to a very consequential bill, and now we're being asked to do it after it's been proposed, again, having had no chance to speak to Canadians, having had no chance to speak to our constituents or any affected group. So you can see why there's a strong reaction to this bill. The way it has been rolled out has honestly, I think I've said enough on that point. Now, I also will say that, we've had some very helpful testimony from officials here, and they certainly have done their utmost, and I want to salute them to walk this committee through many of the technical questions. But I guess the frustrating part of it is that they are limited to technical questions about the wording of the bill. If I want substantive questions answered about impacts, how this was developed, are there other options, they cannot speak to those parts of the questions. There has certainly been a fair amount of misinformation. I'll acknowledge, as Mr. Noormohamed said, that some concerns out there about whether this make or model of rifle or shotgun will be on the list have been refuted. But again, it goes to communication and rollout. The government should have done this from the get-go to make the Canadian public understand exactly what its intention is. The other thing, too, Mr. Chair, is that, for some makes and models, right, after the May 2020 OIC was launched, and by the way, let's face it, that section of the criminal code that allows for those orders in council has been used by both Liberals and Conservatives, and we do have extreme policy lurches on both sides. But to go, for some people who might have owned a firearm that escaped the May 2020 OIC, afterwards they probably said, phew, my firearm is safe, the government didn't take it, and a lot of these are non-restricted firearms that are now being moved to prohibited. They're skipping a step. They're not even going into the restricted category. They're just going straight to outright prohibited. The government never explored other options. I mean, this is kind of the sledgehammer approach. There were never any other options explored. This could have been the homework that was so crucial to be done before the amendment was proposed. So could we have explored options such as tighter licensing requirements for semi-automatic firearms? I understand the concern that's out there. A semi-automatic firearm can discharge ammunition at a much faster rate than a lever action, a bolt action rifle can. So I understand there are concerns, and yes, there are some makes and models that have been used in horrible crimes. You could find a lot of non-restricted firearms that you could say the same thing about. There's a requirement, Mr. Chair, for restricted firearms, handguns. They all have to be registered. Did the government ever explore that as an option over the concerns that people have with some semi-automatic firearms? Again, we never had the chance to explore a middle ground here to find a compromise, and that's what we as a committee are now being forced to do. The other thing I want to put on the record, because I think last week's announcement by the Assembly of First Nations was a game changer. For a government that has, in the 7 years that I've been here, has talked about how no relationship is more important than that with First Nations, that unanimous resolution from the AFN should serve as a wake-up call. And I want to remind committee members that it was in the previous Parliament that we finally passed an Act of Parliament to bring Canada's federal laws into harmony with the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So if you look at some of the articles of the Declaration, the fact that Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual relationship with their traditionally owned or otherwise occupied and used lands, territories, waters, coastal seas, and other resources, and to uphold their responsibilities to future generations in this regard. Again, this goes to their relationship with the land, the resources that are on it, the fact that hunting is not just something that they do for fun. These firearms are tools. They provide for their families. And there are many other articles which establish that states, like the Canadian state, have a duty that whenever we are implementing changes that affect that relationship, affect the way that Indigenous peoples can practice their traditions on their lands, it has a duty to consult. We're being asked to do the consultation after the fact. So if we look at the actual law that was passed in the previous Parliament, it states that under the Act, the Government of Canada will work in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples to take all measures necessary to ensure the laws of Canada are consistent with the Declaration, prepare and implement an action plan to achieve the objectives of the Declaration, and develop annual reports on the progress and submit them to Parliament. I would submit to this committee that given the overwhelming negative reaction that we have seen from Indigenous groups, that has not been done. Like I heard Minister Mendicino in the House today, when a specific question was asked of him about the AFN resolution last week, he mentioned that he had spoken to them. That's not consultation with Indigenous peoples. I'm sorry, that's not. You don't announce a policy, you don't announce an amendment to a bill and then consult. It happens the other way around, and that was obviously not done. And again, the other thing I want to mention, we know that Canada as a state has a duty under the UN Declaration. I don't think that has been met in this case. And we haven't had a charter statement issued. I know that for the previous bill, C-21, the one that was introduced in the 43rd Parliament, the government introduced a charter statement. Given how expansive this amendment to the bill is, the fact that it is widening the net of what's going to be impacted, I would submit, Mr. Chair, that a charter statement is also needed for this additional section. So I don't think a charter statement requirement for this amendment, compliance with the declaration has been met. There's been talk about the number of witnesses we need. I think absolutely 2 is not enough. I think 20 might be too high. So I keep on, as we've approached this meeting, I've been wondering, if this was a standalone piece of legislation, i.e. if Minister Mendicino, if he felt so strongly about this amendment and had taken the time to make his case in a 20-minute second reading speech, where we would have 10 minutes of questions and comments to ask him about that, where he could stand in the House and defend why this is a strong idea and why it should be passed in principle and sent to the committee. If that was the case, then I would expect that we would allocate the same number of meetings to such a substantive expansion of firearms legislation as we have to C-71 and to C-21. So I would land on 8 as a minimum. 8 meetings, with that many witnesses, I believe we would land somewhere in the neighborhood of 60. You'd have to check my math. But, we would want to hear from many of the witnesses that we have already had on C-21 because, again, we never had the chance to ask them about the impact on long guns. We would want to hear from as many Indigenous groups as possible. At a bare minimum, we're talking about the Assembly of First Nations, the Métis National Council, ITK, representing the Inuit up north. I know that there's been mention of a premier. We want to know from many of the provincial Indigenous groups as well. we never had the chance to talk to the various police forces that were here about, what is your opinion about this? And your experience in law enforcement, is this a massive problem? Is the way this amendment worded going to help you do your job, et cetera, et cetera? The answers to that might be yes, but we, again, never had the chance to get that on record. I would want to have people from my own riding. I was talking with a constituent today on the phone. He's owned firearms for most of his life, and he's just bewildered by the fact that why is my firearm suddenly appearing on this list, this scheduled list? Like all I want to do is have my firearm to be able to go out and hunt. He's an ex-military. He knows how to handle a firearm. It goes to the fact that we've never had the chance as representatives in our own ridings, but across this country, to talk to people. So I understand the intent behind the amendment. Sure, I understand. But it's an abusive process to go about it this way. If you have an idea as substantive of this and you are sure that it's the right way to go, then do it the right way. Submit it to parliamentary process where it goes through a second reading, where it goes through full range of committee meetings, where we have the chance to adequately study it and have the runway to do so, where we can consult with legislative council after having heard from witnesses on whether there might be some appropriate sub-amendments. So I would like, Mr. Chair, to move a very small sub-amendment. I do agree with the Conservatives that travel would be necessary. I think that this committee could benefit from having a lot of that hands-on knowledge. But so I would keep everything related to travel, and my only change, Mr. Chair, would be that we change the number 20 to 8. And that would be the bare minimum, because it's giving this substantive amendment the same respect that we have to the previous Bill C-71 and to the current Bill C-21. So I will close there. I think I've put everything on the record that I needed to. But, honestly, we are stuck in the mud right now on our 7th meeting precisely because of how this was rolled out. And I'm sorry to my Liberal colleagues, but the blame for that lies squarely on your shoulders. They created this mess, and they have to find a way to fix it. It's not our responsibility as the opposition. We're trying our best with our limited resources, but we do not have the vast and powerful resources of a government, of a national government, with 2 departments, public safety and justice. We don't have the ability to create broad national surveys going out to talk to people. I have myself and my legislative assistant, 2 people. My caucus is less than 10% of the seats, and we're trying our best to find a way forward. But you have to understand that this reaction you're seeing, not only from members of the opposition, but from the public, is precisely because of how this landed. My Liberal colleagues have to wear that and take responsibility
Thank
for
you.
that.
I acknowledge your sub-amendment to change 20 to 8. So the discussion now is on
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
On a point of order, Ms.
I believe he
Dancho.
said at least 8 meetings. Not 8 definitively, but at least 8 meetings. I believe that's what the member said.
Said at least 8, is that correct? Okay. So that is the sub-amendment before us.
Just a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Badaway, go ahead.
To the clerk, are we not to vote on the amendment first, the first amendment, and then if that doesn't, then proceed? Then
Well,
we go to the
we're
other
allowed to go one deeper. We're allowed to go to a sub-amendment. And so we'll vote on the sub-amendment, except that we do have more people to discuss. So we are now engaging discussion on Mr. MacGregor's sub-amendment to Ms. Dancho's amendment to Ms. Michaud's motion. So we have Mr. Motz, followed by Mr. Shipley, followed by Madame Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't necessarily speak directly to Mr. McAllister's sub-amendment. However, I will say that I agree that we need a minimum of meetings. 2 certainly wasn't sufficient. And I guess I have some confusion whether we are meeting with the travel. I agree we need to travel and meet some of these people who asking them to come, all of them to come to Ottawa would be unreasonable for their resources as well. Are Are we talking about 8 meetings where we travel to have 8? Because we also need meetings here. There's going to be groups and organizations that are going to want to come to Ottawa and meet here. So I think we need some clarity around that, and I guess the minimum of would suffice, and would just when I'm done my intervention, I would certainly like to have some clarity from Mr. McAllister on that. I want.
Actually, it's.
What did I say? Did I say McAllister again? I'm so sorry. I can't believe it. Mr. MacGregor.
Is it Gregor
Sorry.
McAllister or Alistair
Can you turn your name
MacGregor?
tag so I can actually see it? Sorry. I apologize. I know, I apologize. I want to thank Mr. MacGregor for his amazing intervention. He took a lot of the things I was going to say, and I will repeat some of them because I think they're worth repeating. First, the Liberals need to wear this mess, and that's the bottom line. They need to wear this mess. And how did we get here? Like, how in the world did we get to this point where we spent 6 meetings on a government amendment to a bill that they were so proud of? There's 140 plus amendments to this bill, and they're not all opposition. Many of them are the government's. I mean, G46 is a good indication of 140. They got 46 amendments to their own bill that was supposed to be so perfect. That should
Point
speak
d'ordre,
to the...
Monsieur le Président.
What? Pardon me?
Madame Michaud, on a point of order.
J'ai cru comprendre.
I understand that Mr. Motz asked a question to Mr. MacGregor, asking him to clarify his sub-amendment. I wonder if you would let him respond before Mr. Motz goes on with his point.
Mr. MacGregor, if you wish to respond to the question.
Can I just have the question repeated?
What did I ask? Which one? I had lots of questions.
I believe the question was whether the proposed travel was
Okay.
part of the 8 meetings or not.
So in his 8 minimum
Yeah,
meetings.
so to clarify, I did not change the travel portion. It was only the number of meetings. So the amendment that Ms. Dancho moved, that is still part of it. My sub-amendment only amended the number of meetings.
So the 8 includes travel.
Thank you for that clarification. So before I was, point of order, I was going to ask the question about why are we in this mess? Why did we have 6 meetings to
I'm
get
sorry,
stuck
did I hear
on?
a point of order from someone?
No, he actually said it himself.
No, it was me.
Oh,
He pointed word himself.
No.
I may be going into a coma
I did
here, so
not,
some of
but
this stuff I
anyway.
might miss.
Why are we discussing this motion for the 7th meeting now? Because of the mess that the Liberals tried to pull a fast one on Canadians. Let's back up just a little bit. Why did we have this done, and how did Bill C-21 get to this place? It was discussed in the House, and it was debated as a handgun freeze. It was debated as a need to involve the improvement of red flag laws. We saw that it was going to impact sport shooters and many other of those communities, and that was the intent behind what the government said they were trying to do. Then when the bill comes here, and again, many people debated, all parties were able to debate this bill in the House, and none of us were under the impression that it was anything more than what was presented to the House and to Canadians. Then at the 11th and a half hour, at clause by clause, the Liberals tried to pull a fast one on Canadians. They tried to...
Mr. Motz,
Yes, sir.
if I could interrupt. I know everybody's got a lot on their chest they want to go off, but we got less than an hour to finish this off. Otherwise, we're going to have to meet and settle it on probably Thursday. So I would urge everyone to stick to the amendments, not how we got here, not whether the shortcomings of the bill, but whether or not we should meet to have more witnesses and how many meetings that should be and whether we should travel. I certainly will give you as much latitude as I have everyone else, but I would certainly encourage everyone to kind of, if we could focus on the matter at hand, it will help us get through this. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Like I said, we are here because of the Liberals, not following, as was already indicated, due process. They're bringing a significant amendments to a bill that already was contentious to many Canadians, and now they've added a whole new scheme to this bill. I think, and I believe firmly that the government, the Liberals, did not decide to throw this amendment into the last minute. I believe very strongly that when Minister Mendocino made these comments back in May, there was already conversations, there was already plans in the works to try and manipulate, pull a fast one on Canadians, and then now, because of the enormous response from Canadians, from opposition, they're now trying to backtrack and save face. And this is a complete sham, to be honest with you. Firearms have dominated a lot of my email correspondence over the last several weeks. I think we're above 6,000 already. I have not had one that's in favor of what this government has tried to do, and none of them. And in fact, the majority of the phone calls we received and the thousands of emails we've received have suggested many things, most of which I can't repeat here. But ones that I can repeat are, why doesn't, if the government is so intent on going after hunters, why don't they propose a bill, a standalone bill? Pull this right from C-21. Let's have the conversation about what C-21 was intended to do to deal with handguns, and let's go back to it. So, as Mr. MacGregor indicated, in his sub amendment, I agree that we need a substantial number of meetings, and I don't want to be prescribed that it remain at 8, as Ms. Dancho has done in her amendment to this bill. She proposed 20. We need to ensure that if the government doesn't have the good common sense to pull this amendment on their own, then the committee's got to have to do the consultative work that this government failed to do. And as a result, I don't think 8 meetings is going to suffice either. There are multiple groups from across this country, hunting and sporting groups, industry, Indigenous Canadians, you name it. We're not going to get 8 meetings. And what is that? 16 hours, even at two different groups per hour. That's not going to be a significant number of groups. That's 30-some groups that's going to be able to hear to speak. I think we're just scratching the surface. And there's a reason that Canadians don't trust this government. There's many reasons, actually. And this is just another example of trying to manipulate, pull a fast one, whatever name you want to call it, to get Canadians to buy into something that is their ideological agenda. And so, again, I have more to say on this as we get to the regular amendment. But suffice to say that while I agree that we need many more than 2 meetings, I certainly am not favorable to trying to get everybody in a process of 8.
Thank you, Chair. And I did have many notes here, but seeing how you're being very cognizant of the clock today, I will be also, even though not everybody has been in here a lot lately, and I'm definitely not one for over-speaking my turn in here. I think everybody would agree with that. I just have a few quick things to say. I came into this a little excited. This was going to be my first clause-by-clause review. That excitement's been kind of removed from me. We've kind of got bogged down in a quagmire here, quite frankly. We're now in our 7th meeting. We've had 6, and we really haven't accomplished a lot. So I'm just going to cut to the chase. I've got a lot of other notes here, but I know we want to move on. We're going to try and get this thing moving. The only thing I'm going to say is this. I have heard the term misinformation so much lately, it's crazy. Every time someone says something anywhere now, it's just misinformation. You're saying misinformation, you're spewing misinformation, everything's misinformation. So let's go to the heart of it. Let's have these meetings. Let's stop the misinformation. Let's go out there and get the real factual information from the people who are using these hunting rifles that are trying to be banned in here. So let's stop with the misinformation. hopefully, Mr. Taleeb, you've used that phrase a lot, Mr. Noormohamed, sorry, Taleeb. And let's go out there and get the facts. And I don't think we can do that in 2 meetings. There's a lot of facts out there. Everybody's talking about wanting to get the facts. Let's go get them. As I said, I did have many other notes here, but I know we're being aware of time, so I'm going to succeed my time over, and that's all I'll be saying today. But I'm in favor of more meetings. We've got to get down to get the facts on this and move forward.
I'm hoping we could reach a decision by the end of the meeting, a decision on this motion. I have noted that all the parties have weighed in on the amount of meetings they would like to have. Just noting the fact that we have been stuck in the mud for 6 entire meetings, and that rehearing witnesses is already quite exceptional. This amendment is also quite exceptional, so it makes sense somewhat. But what I'm hearing is the Conservatives are saying 20 meetings, 4 hours with the minister, and a trip across Canada, and they're acting like that's reasonable. I find that a bit much. It is the government's job to carry out pan-Canadian consultations. That's not our job. Yes, it is necessary to hear from people who will bear the brunt of the impact of G4. And that's why, for me, it seems reasonable to have 2 meetings to hear from them. What I'm getting is that Conservatives don't want to do 8 meetings either, which is what the NDP has proposed. So what I suggest is we vote on the sub-amendment. And then we vote on the amendment and we vote on the motion. That way we can reach a decision by the end of this meeting. So I move we vote.
We can't call a question, as it were. So we go now to Ms. Dancho, followed by Mr. Lloyd. On the sub-amendment?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate Mr. MacGregor's remarks very much. I know it's week 4. It's nice to hear from him. It feels like Mr. MacGregor is quite level-headed, but I've never seen him so fired up. So I did appreciate the passion in his remarks. It's certainly how I've been feeling. I think that's been evident over the last number of weeks. And this is obviously a very personal issue to many of us who have this experience in our communities and the like. So I appreciate the passion coming out of this committee. And frankly, on all sides, it's an important issue to debate and talk about. But I did want to make the point, just in response to Ms. Michaud, I take her point, but the government hasn't done the consultation. That's the problem. That is why we're suggesting, and we've put forward an idea that since they haven't done their homework, they don't want to go across the country, they don't want to talk to Northern Canadians, rural Canadians, or Indigenous Canadians, then we will do the work. And I think Mr. MacGregor, I won't repeat all his remarks, but he made a very clear argument, as we have been, that we're only in this mess because the Liberals brought this forward in the 11th hour. We wouldn't be here in this extraordinary circumstance had they not done that. So that's why we proposed 20 meetings, and included in that would be travel to rural and northern Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities. I think it's more than reasonable, but again, if it was up to me, there'd be 50 meetings. That's what the government should have done, minimum, before that they launched this on the committee at the 11th hour. But I would say to 8 meetings, just to speak to the sub-amendment quickly, because I know we're running out of time. 8 meetings is okay. I was hoping that we perhaps could meet in the middle, though, but I know I can't sub-amend a sub-amendment. So I'm not very keen. Yeah, I'm not overly keen on 8. I would have said maybe if 12 would have been more reasonable, perhaps, but I don't believe I can amend a sub-amendment. So I just think 8 with the minister included in that means only 7. And I just don't feel that that's enough, Mr. Chair. So thank you.
Mr. Lloyd.
Yes, I'll make this brief. I really appreciate Mr. MacGregor for bringing up this sub-amendment. And hearing the concerns from Madame Michaud very clearly. I think I could accept 8 meetings, but I think if we're going to be traveling, we got to understand this isn't going to be the 2-hour meetings that we usually have here in Ottawa. Like if we're going to go to a place like Whitehorse, like we'd be having substantially like a longer meeting than 2 hours, because we need to have an opportunity for witnesses to be heard, and if people are going to be coming in from the community. So, I mean, at least 8 meetings. If the committee finds at the end of those 7 meetings that we feel like we've left out important groups and that we need a couple additional meetings, then I think that we're leaving it open in this amendment by saying at least 8 to add those meetings at a later date. So I hope with that understanding that, they'll be longer than 2 hours, that at least 8 is acceptable, and that if needed, we could add additional ones if the committee feels. So I'm going to end my remarks there, and I hope that we can get committee support for this because it is important to get consultation on this, and I think it helps rebuild trust with Canadians. Thank you.
Can I just do a quick point of order, just a point of clarification?
On a point of order? Yes.
Is it the case, perhaps the clerk can answer, if we do go to Yellowknife or something, would it be a 2-hour meeting like I'm thinking it would be, or would it actually be all day? Because that does change the...
Well, that's an
idea.
open
I'm not
question.
quite
It
sure.
should also be noted that we wouldn't be able to travel before April, according to the clerk is
Well, anything is
identified that. So, but I think that's something on a point of order.
I believe, I understand that there has been, committee travel has been finalized for prior to March 31st, I believe. But I think if we have consent from the whips of all parties, that we could bring forward emergency funding to support a trip. I mean, when the decision on committee travel was decided, I believe back in October, we had no idea that this amendment was coming. And so for the government to drop an amendment at this late of stage, and then say, too bad, so sad, you can't travel to deal with this
I think we're
amendment.
going beyond the point of order here.
Okay, so I just wanted to make a point of order that with the whips, agreement of the whips of all parties, we could travel before March 31st. Thank you.
All right.
Point of order, Chair.
Mr. MacGregor on a point of order.
I think there might be some confusion over how I amended the amendment. Everything that Ms. Dancho moved stands except for the number 20. I only replaced the number 20 in her amendment with at least 8 meetings. So there were questions about the ministers, so nothing else in Ms. Dancho's amendment changes. That's still part of it. The only thing I changed was the number 20 to at least 8. I just wanted that clarified on the record.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. MacGregor, for the clarification. That being the case, and seeing no one wishing to speak, we will have a vote on Mr. MacGregor's sub-amendment.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce qu'on peut prendre...
Point of order. Could we just hold on a bit, suspend briefly, because there's some, I don't know how to put this, unofficial conversations, shall we say.
We'll suspend for 5 minutes. Meeting suspended. This meeting is now resumed. We are at the point where we were going to take a vote on Mr. MacGregor's sub-amendment, which is to modify Ms. Dancho's motion to change the words 20 consecutive meetings to be at least 8 consecutive meetings. Is this a point of order? Or
Yes, it's just, well, I think it's relevant, just
Okay, go
given
ahead.
that I think we should put on the record the conversation because folks weren't able to be aware who are watching.
Okay, so we're going to carry on the discussion
Sure.
on Mr.
I'll just be brief, though. I'm
MacGregor's
not looking to
motion.
drag this out. But so, again, committees, as you know, Mr. Chair, are about collaboration. And right now, we're really looking at either 2 meetings or about 8 or more, and with travel. That's what we've put forward. Again, the proposal was 2. And then we put forward 20 plus the minister, and within that 20, we would do rural and northern travel, including First Nations. The sub-amendment is saying at least 8, so cuts it down from 20 to at least 8, with consultations from the bloc, and she can correct me if I'm not saying this correctly, but we would do, and I don't know if we need to, I know we can't sub-amend a sub-amendment, but I think we can agree as a committee that this is what we're implying by the sub-amendment. We would say that it would be 8 meetings, not at least 8. Again, this is what we need to get a consensus here, so that's why this is important. So 8. If you just allow me to finish quickly.
Well, I'm just going to suggest that if we vote on Mr. MacGregor's amendment,
right? But as you said, we're running out the clock.
Then you could amend the amended motion, right?
Or what we've done in the past, we've just agreed, and it's on the record, so we can reference it if anyone ever wants to cause problems, but. Just for efficiency's sake, what I've talked to the bloc about is she would agree to 8 meeting, not at least 8, but 8 specifically. And we're not quite aligning on the travel. So rather than what our original vision was to do notable trips, many trips around BC and Atlantic Canada, et cetera, and up north, that we commit as a committee to doing 1 stint up north, since that's really the most disadvantage for travel and resources, and it is just very far away. So that would be what we talked about. So I'm just putting that out there. Well, I think I am on a point of order. So can you point of order?
Sorry, point of clarification. What does a stint mean?
Oh, like I would, I would assume it would be like 1 week where we go up north. We go to like Nunavut, Yellowknife, maybe Churchill. We're just kind of going across the north. Again, they're the most at a disadvantage to travel to Ottawa. I think Mr. Dane's point, or Mr. Lloyd's point, was very clear. If we want to make sure we're not just doing a strictly colonial approach to this and expecting everybody to come to Ottawa, I think we should go into people's community and give them the respect they deserve. So I think we've compromised a little bit. Rather than doing a lot of travel, we would do one sort of trip up north, and then the rest from other regions would be expected to do regional. So I think I've made that clear. Of course, she's welcome to correct me, but I believe that that's what we can have a consensus on that.
Okay, so Mr. MacGregor, your motion was to have at least 8, I'm sorry, I'm just clarifying with Mr. MacGregor whether he agrees. So your motion was to change Ms. Dancho's motion to read at least 8 meetings. Do we have kind of collective agreement that do you agree to change that to be 8 precisely?
I do agree with what Ms. Dancho is proposing. I think there's been a lot of work in the suspension that we had to try and hammer out somewhere where we can come together. So I agree with what's being proposed.
Okay, so what I'm proposing that the vote now is on is that your amendment is to change the word 20 to 8, and that's it. Okay? So is there any further discussion on that? Mr. Noormohamed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I think we all agree that there is still work to be done on this. I think there's a lot of conversations yet to be had. There's a lot of people to hear from. I frankly don't see why. What I am struggling with is how we say on one hand we want 50 meetings or we have 20, we need 20 meetings to be able to hear everybody properly, but now we can condense that into 8, but somehow that's the magic number that's going to satisfy everybody. And so, yes, as Mr. Motz noted, we supported Madame Michaud's original proposal of 2 meetings, because the process of consultation. Perhaps, I think we've heard this before, there should have been a different process for consultation that was undertaken previously. But the work of the committee is to consider the bill. We have agreed to suspend to discuss, all of us, the amendment that we have before us. How do we limit? I'm trying to figure out how we limit very specifically the conversations that we have in respect to the specific amendment that we've got before us, and how we kind of if we take this approach that we want 8 meetings on this particular amendment, what's to say that we now at the next amendment say, you know what, we're not comfortable, and instead of actually coming out and saying, some parties may come out and say, we actually don't like the whole bill, so instead of coming out and saying we don't like the whole bill, we want to just vote it down, we're going to, if I can get to my point, Mr. Chair, sorry, we kind of get to a place where it becomes amendment upon amendment. It becomes, 1064 on amendment upon amendment upon amendment. Now, I appreciate what Mr. McAllister, sorry, Mr. McGregor. Thank you for that. I appreciate what Mr. MacGregor has said, and I appreciate sincerely that there is a need for further consultation. I'm not clear on whether we achieve that objective by taking one trip to one part of this country, and then we hear accusations from folks saying we ignored this part or we ignored that part, and we still rush through it.
So I think you're speaking to the broader motion, the broader amendment. The question on the table right now is, do we do 8 meetings in Ms. Dancho's amendment, or do we do 20, which is what it stands now? All this other stuff about travel and stuff are part of Ms. Dancho's amendment. Once we finish Mr. MacGregor's amendment, we can speak meaningfully to that. So I'm going to ask if you would like to speak first after we have the vote on that sub-amendment, sorry, on that amendment, followed by Mr. Lloyd. I'm sorry? Point of clarification.
You said consecutive. You said consecutive earlier. I didn't hear any one say consecutive. My understanding of consecutive is continuous meetings back to back.
Ms. Dancho's motion says consecutive.
Did you say consecutive? That was Madam Michaud's motion.
Mr. Chair, can I, point of order?
Mr. Badaway on a point of order,
Thank
please.
you. Can we deal with one amendment at a time here? So we have a sub-amendment on the table. Can we deal with that? And
I
then-
dream of this. I dream of this.
Okay,
So let us,
one at a time here.
let us have the vote on Mr. MacGregor's amendment, which was merely to change the word 20 to 8. Okay? All right, so are we in favor of that amendment?
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sub-amendment, sorry.
Mr. Chair, sorry, point of order. If we're taking, and sorry, this may be sort of a silly question, just sort of process-wise. We're taking the 20 and turning it, basically switching the 20 to an 8, correct? But does that not cause the effect of the entirety of the motion? Or are we just amending?
We're changing only that one word.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all in favor of Mr. MacGregor's amendment changing 20 to 8, raise your hands, please.
We get a recorded vision,
Mr. Lloyd wants to, yeah, absolutely. Mr. Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Can I just have a clarification on that, please, Mr. Chairman? You said 8 meetings. Does that include travel as well?
The only change,
20 to 8. We'll get to the amendment
Rest of
after
hers,
this
okay.
vote.
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So the question is on the sub-amendment. Mr. Chang,
I vote no.
Mr. Badaway, Mr. Noormohamed,
Nope.
Monsieur Shipley,
No.
Mr. Fonseca,
No.
Ms. Dancho,
Oui.
Mr. Lloyd,
Yes.
Mr. Motz,
Yes.
Mr. Shipley,
Yes.
Madame Michaud,
En faveur.
In favor.
MacGregor,
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, the amendment passes. So the discussion now is on Ms. Dancho's amendment as amended by Mr. MacGregor, which is, I'm not going to read it, but it's 8 consecutive meetings as opposed to 20. Is there any discussion on Ms. Dancho's amendment as modified by Mr. MacGregor? Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some questions about the meaning of the term consecutive. My understanding of the literal definition of the word is back-to-back meetings, which I don't think that's what this committee really wants to have, because if we had 8 back-to-back meetings, that'd be 16 hours, at least 16 hours of testimony. So I just wanted to get a clarification on that, maybe from the clerk. But then speaking more substantively on the motion, I think it would be appropriate for this committee to consider a travel component to these 8 meetings. As I said, there's a lot of communities that lack the capacity to participate in meetings, to come to Ottawa, whether it be physically or through being involved with, rural broadband. We know is very poor. Even in my region, which is next to a major metropolitan area, people can't get access to high-speed internet. So I think it'd be really critical and a sign of a reconciliation specifically for the Indigenous peoples for this committee to entertain at least one trip to northern Canada. I'm thinking, always willing to work with other committee members to find something that's acceptable. But I think having a number of sort of open meetings for witnesses in northern Canada to participate in their own communities would be very important for this. So I'm in support of this motion and would like kind of some clarification on consecutive.
So I would interpret a consecutive to mean one after the other without, any breaks. Although there's often times when we need to intersperse breaks because of estimates or whatever, right? But anyway, that's how I interpret it. So we go now to Mr.
Point d'ordre,
Noormohamed.
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. I'd like to clarify because it's a word that appeared in my motion. I'd like to clarify the intention behind the word consecutive because I moved the original motion. I don't mean back-to-back all in one day. All I meant was for the 2 meetings to be one after the other. So, for example, we were going to have hear from witnesses on Tuesday and then Thursday. Not one meeting with some witnesses and then another 3 weeks later. Does that clarify things?
Interpretation of consecutive would be just that, right? Right. If someone wishes to get rid of the word consecutive, that could be a sub-amendment. But I can't believe I actually am soliciting sub-amendments at this point.
If I'm correct, we are now debating the amended amendment, which was Madame Michaud's original.
Madame Michaud's amendment has been proposed to be, Madame Michaud's motion has been proposed to be amended by Ms. Dancho, which has been modified by Mr. MacGregor. So we are speaking to Ms. Dancho's amendment as modified by Mr. MacGregor's sub-amendment. And if anybody's confused, it's me. So
Okay.
That's why we have clerks.
So in order to make sure we're talking about that, and this is, can we just make sure? It's a short motion. Can somebody read out the correct language so we know what the heck we're talking about? Because we've had lots of good discussions today, and I make sure we don't waste time talking about something that is not.
Okay, I will do so. So the amendment, as it stands, the ones we're discussing right now, is that the committee temporarily suspend the clause-by-clause study of Bill C-21 and that it allocate 8 consecutive meetings to study the effects of Amendments G4 and G46, and that these meetings include committee travel across Canada as soon as possible to rural, northern, and Indigenous communities to hear from impacted individuals. That is the result of Ms. Dancho's amendment as modified by Mr. MacGregor. Okay. Do you have any further discussion?
I do. I have many thoughts, many questions. So as I understand it now, we are proposing 8 meetings with no clear no clear definition in terms of how many meetings in this particular motion, how much travel that we are prepared to do. Like that's not on this page. So basically, right now, it's effectively we could travel for all 8 meetings. Sorry, right. But in theory, we could right now. I'm not even
point of order, Chair. Sorry to interrupt my wonderful colleague.
Ms. Damoff, on a point of order, please.
I'm wondering if the clerk could explain to us, please, when travel is allowed to happen, whether this urgent matters travel actually exists, because I think we need an explanation on that, and it's 5:19 now. So could he please explain when travel would be possible and if urgent matters travel actually exists?
I would invite the clerk to do so. However, I have been advised that this would have to be settled by the committee of, I forget which committee it is, which probably won't meet again until February. As a practical matter, we probably can't travel until at least April. Mr. Clerk, if you would wish to...
So the standard procedure for a committee to travel has to go through a process to submit the travel purpose to the subcommittee on committee's budget. And afterwards has to go back a second time to after the purpose to present the budget of this travel, and then afterwards it has to be adopted in the House. So the House has to authorize the trips. So usually this process takes several weeks, and we have already passed the deadlines for the next month's trips. And if the committee would like to travel according to the normal procedure, it would be for a travel starting on next April. So that's the standard procedure.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Mr. Noormohamed has the floor. Next, we have Ms. Damoff, Madame Michaud, Mr. Badaway, and Ms. Dancho. I'm fearful we're not going to get through this list. I suspect we're going to have to suspend this meeting until Thursday at the end of the day. So I'll ask Mr. Noormohamed to, you have the floor still?
So, I mean, and before I get into it, I just want to just clarify something with the clerk then. If we're saying we cannot actually travel until April, are we then saying that we are literally going to be sitting in abeyance until such time as we are able to travel and complete whatever these meetings are supposed to be? Because if that's the case, then what is the committee going to do between now and then? I think it's a question that would help me consider how I'm going to vote on this.
That's a very good question. My expectation is if we are required to travel, we would not be able to resume clause by clause until after we've made at least one trip, which would, I guess, put us into the territory of hearing testimony on C20 and potentially finishing the Russia study. Should we need to fill in some time. But it's kind of a mushy area. I'm not exactly sure where we're going to go with that. So that was a point of clarification. You still have
I do want to. Thank you. So I guess what I'm struggling with the idea that we would now do 8 meetings with an unlimited potential amount of travel that may or may not begin until April, with then 3 weeks left to potentially try and, if we are satisfied with the consultations that we will have had on one amendment, try to figure out how over the course of the next 3 weeks of the session we're going to get past critically important gun legislation that I am I believe very strongly that the majority of Canadians want us to get done. I think we are all in agreement that it is important to get some more consultation and to try and address a lot of the challenges, a lot of the issues, a lot of the concerns that have been raised. Nobody's disputing that point. But to say that we now want to effectively hold up, and how we got here, look, how we got here is a different conversation for a different day, but how we get to a solution, I think, is what Canadians are looking for here. The idea that we would now sit effectively unable to move this legislation forward at the very least until we return from whatever travel in April, and then try to spend 3 weeks to do this, to me, I just don't understand how we in good conscience can actually go back to our constituents and say, because we decided we want to go on trips, that we're going to hold this legislation back until April at the earliest. I am not saying that we shouldn't consult with communities in the North, in Atlantic Canada, in British Columbia. But we have learned over the last 2 years, my goodness, we managed to conduct Parliament virtually. There are ways for us to try and do this in a way that actually is efficient, that gets to where I think people want to go, which is to have heard voices, to be able to deal with the, yes, I'm going to use the word misinformation that, as Mr. MacGregor has noted, is rightly out there. I think it addresses some of the gaps, perhaps, in how people might have wanted this to have gone differently. But, the fact that we would say, let's not get this over the finish line in whatever form that ends up being, with everybody's input, and I said this many times, there is no monopoly on good ideas. I have said this to every single one of my colleagues in this committee. I am open to hearing different ways of doing things. We are all open to that. The minister said this. The Prime Minister said this. So let's get past the fact that there is, that there may be a difference of opinion as to how we got to where we are today. But I don't know how we say we're going to stop all work completely until we have managed to do trips. Travel is important. Looking people in the eye is important, absolutely. But we managed to do it for 2.5 years. We managed to consult with people in ways that use technology. I am really quite worried at what we do when we go back, regardless of what party we belong to, how we can go back in good conscience and say, look, we decided we weren't going to get this thing, we weren't going to have active debate on anything past the, clause 4 of this bill until sort of the entire year is run out, and then maybe we'll pick it back up again. Right? Canadians demanded of us that we pass gun legislation. The NDP, the Bloc,
Point d'ordre,
us.
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair.
Une question?
It's a point of clarification. I'm hoping to ask the clerk something. Travel seems like it's a complicated procedure. There's only 4 minutes left to reach a decision. We may not be able to get consensus about the number of meetings, but maybe when we get back from the holidays, could we possibly take out the provision about travel and then that way perhaps the Conservatives could table a new motion to hold week-long consultations around the country? Since there's consensus about 8 meetings, would that be possible?
For us specifies travel. But I think we are out of time. So I'm going to suspend until Thursday. We can resume from where we left off.
A point of order, Mr. Chair. If the
Yes.
House rises tomorrow, how does that work for Thursday?
We're allowed to carry on despite, the only thing that messes up is prorogation and dissolution.
Sorry, another point of order. Is there not, and then perhaps all committee members will be very excited to meet on Thursday, and that's completely fine if I'm off base here, but perhaps given that China Committee was usually at coming up, and I think that was a reason we couldn't go late on during this committee slotted time. What I'm saying is I believe the resources are available if we want to go a little longer just to round this up, but if committee members are very excited to meet after the House rises tomorrow, I will be there, but just a suggestion.
Well, I was hoping to go home myself, but we can. We have like 5-10 minutes left in resources that are available to us. Mr. Noormohamed.
Point of order, Chair.
So, Mr. Noormohamed, I've just recognized him. Was that on point of order?
I still have the floor. But
Yeah. Okay. So,
Go ahead.
Mr. Motz, please go ahead on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We can solve this whole mess if the Liberals would just agree to get rid of
Okay,
clause.
not a point of order.
Government Order 4.
Not a point of order. So, we're out of time. Mr. Noormohamed is in full sway here. I feel he's got more miles left to go. So we will suspend at this time and resume from where we left off. When we resume on Thursday, I don't know if there's any other time available. Our regular slot is Thursday morning. Mr. Noormohamed has the floor, followed by Ms. Damoff, Madame Michaud, Mr. Badaway, and Ms. Dancho.
Sorry, you didn't, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, before you clang the gavel, pardon me. It's been a long day. I'm just wondering if you can answer my question, if we have time to finish this up now. Like, why don't we just go another half an hour?
Well, because, we don't have
I
time
still
for
have
that.
the
We don't have resources to go past 5 more minutes, right?
But we do.
Point of order.
The resources do
Mr.
exist.
Chair.
On the same point of order?
No, different point of order, but we still haven't dealt with the previous question that was asked in the previous point of order that Madame Michaud had raised. So, we have got a whole bunch of things that are in flux here that predicate whether or not, first of all, there's the question of the meeting on Thursday. There's the question of whether or not we have an actual answer to understand the problem that we're trying to address. And so, I think we're in a bit of a spin, and we're now entirely out of time, but...
So on your point of order, on everybody's point of order, so when we come back on Thursday, If you wish to modify, make a sub-amendment about travel or such, that would be appropriate. But at this point, we're out of time, so.
Okay, so
One
I will
last
pick
point
up
of order.
with Florian at the end.
I'm sorry.
So I will pick up with where I was on the, right?
I just have one more point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sancho, on point of order.
Okay, so if we're not finished today, perhaps I think the committee should be made aware. What happens if we don't finish on Thursday? What happens then?
Then we would probably suspend again until the next opportunity.
And when would that be?
But I don't want to speculate. I think we should deal with Thursday and hopefully get it done Thursday. Okay?
Okay, but that's no guarantee.
There is no guarantee. This is
All right.
this is the Wild West we're in right now. So
Thank you, Liberals.
so thank you all for
Chair,
all of
can
your-
I
Mr.
can
Chair,
I move
Ms.
to
Damoff.
adjourn the meeting?
I think we need to, well, there has been a motion to adjourn as opposed to suspend.
I vote for that.
It is in order.
You hadn't gavelled yet. Still
I
in the
hadn't gavelled yet, so
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair.
Entre ajourner et
The difference between adjourning and suspending, if we suspend, the discussion continues, and if we adjourn, we don't.
we adjourn. This matter is closed. We carry on with another C21 clause by clause the next time. Right? Okay, so the motion to adjourn has been made. All in favor of adjourning? Mr. Lloyd, go ahead. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Chiang,
I vote yes.
Ms. Damoff,
Yes.
Mr. Noormohamed,
Yes.
Monsieur Shipley,
Oui.
Yes.
Mr. Fonseca,
Yes.
Ms. Dancho,
No.
Mr. Lloyd,
No.
Mr. Motz,
No.
Mr. Shipley,
No.
Madame Michaud,
non.
No.
Mr. MacGregor. 6 nays, 5 yeas.
Okay, motion to adjourn is denied. So we will therefore suspend until Thursday.